I rode with my uncle Cole Drennan for 11 years, and in all that time I never once saw him turn back on a trail he'd already put behind him. Cole was a free-range man, not restless, not running from anything, just made for open country the way some men are made for towns. He didn't go back. Not for weather, not for a broken axle, not for sentiment. He'd said goodbye to his wife's grave in Kansas 7 years before I joined the crew, and he hadn't looked back at that either, far as I could tell. So when he pulled up short 3 days out of Harlan Flats and said, quiet as a man commenting on cloud cover, "We're going back," I thought I'd heard him wrong. I hadn't. That was the summer of 1883, and I was 24 years old, and what I watched happen over the next 4 months on the Calden homestead taught me more about the nature of a man than 11 years on the open range had managed to do. I'm telling it now because Cole's gone, passed in his sleep 2 winters ago, Vera's hand in his, and somebody ought to get it right. We'd been pushing a herd of 312 head north from the Cimarron country, bound for a buyer in Ogallala. 7 men, 12 horses, 1 cook wagon, and Cole at the point like he always was, unhurried, reading the grass and the sky the way other men read newspapers. It was late August, and the prairie was the color of old rope, and the sun came down like a hand pressing you into the dirt. The storm caught us 2 days south of the Platte. Not a killing storm, but mean enough, the kind that comes up sideways in late summer and turns a dry creek into a running problem in under an hour. Cole had us off the low ground before the first real lightning, cattle pushed to a rise, men circling in the rain. By the time it broke, we were soaked through, and the cook wagon had a cracked wheel spoke, and Pepper Avils, our youngest hand, had taken a kick to the shin from a spooked steer, and was walking on stubbornness more than anything else. Cole sent 2 men ahead to check the creek crossing and rode a wide arc himself. When he came back, he had a direction, northeast, 1.5 miles, a homestead he'd spotted the chimney smoke of before the storm rolled in. "We'll ask for a night in the barn," he said. "Pay fare, be gone by first light." Nobody argued. We were all of us wet and hungry, and Pepper needed to get off his horse. The homestead was called the Calden Place, though we didn't know that yet when we rode up in the last gray light. It sat on a dry creek, Willow Run, though the willows were long gone and the creek hadn't run in 2 summers, with a low house, a barn that listed slightly west like it was tired, a kitchen garden, and a collapsed section of roof over what I guessed was a lean-to or a back room. The timbers caved in and left that way, the tarp that had been tied over it mostly torn free by the storm. A woman came out onto the porch before we reached the gate. She had a rifle, and she carried it the way women on the Nebraska prairie carry rifles, not theatrical, not frightened, just present. She was somewhere in her late 30s, dark-haired, wearing a work dress and an apron she hadn't bothered to take off. She looked at 7 wet men and a cook wagon and a remuda of horses, and she didn't step back. Cole touched his hat. "Ma'am, Cole Drennan. We're a cattle crew out of the Cimarron country pushing north. Storm caught us. I'd ask if we might use your barn for the night and water at your well. We'll pay fare and be gone at first light, and we won't trouble you or your property." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Pepper, who was white around the mouth and favoring his left leg, hanging slightly sideways in the saddle. "That one hurt," she said. "Steer caught him," Cole said. "Leg not bad, he'll do." "Bring him inside," she said. "Rest of you, barns around back, wells on the east side. Don't let the horses into the garden." She went back inside. Cole looked at me and I looked at him, and neither of us said anything. We took care of the horses. Her name was Vera Calden. Her husband Thomas had died 14 months before, a fever that came on fast and was done in 8 days. She had no children. She had 40 acres, a milk cow, 6 chickens, a kitchen garden, and the barn full of hay she'd put up herself through July. She had a neighbor named Amos Strell, who ran cattle on 3,000 acres to the west, and who had been sending his foreman around every 6 weeks or so to ask if she'd reconsidered selling. She hadn't. I learned most of this later. That first night I only learned that she could cook from nothing, and that she didn't accept help easily, and that she watched Cole Drennan the way a person watches a weather system they haven't classified yet. She'd fed Pepper first, got him onto a kitchen chair, looked at the shin, declared nothing broken, wrapped it in a clean cloth soaked in something that smelled medicinal, and told him to stay off it till morning. Then she made cornbread from a canister of flour that I could see was near the bottom, salt pork from a crock, coffee from grounds that had been used at least once before. She fed 7 men, and she waved off every offer of additional payment beyond what Cole had already set on the table, $1.04, which was more than fair, and she probably knew it. Cole ate slowly. He wasn't a man who talked at meals as a rule, but he watched. I'd learned to notice when Cole was paying attention and when he was just present. That night he was paying attention. When the meal was done and the men were filing out to the barn, Cole lingered. Vera was at the basin washing bowls. He stood in the doorway, not crowding her, just there. "That flour canister's near empty," he said. She didn't turn around. "I know what's in my own kitchen, Mr. Drennan." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I wasn't doubting it. I was saying thank you for what it cost you to feed us." A pause. She kept washing. "Get some sleep," she said. "First light's early." He went. I'd been close enough to hear it from the yard. I didn't say anything to him about it. With Cole you didn't. We were gone before the sun was full up. Vera Calden stood on her porch with her coffee and watched us go. Cole touched his hat. She nodded once. That was all of it. We made the Platte crossing by midday and pushed hard north. 3 days out of Harlan Flats, like I said, that's when Cole pulled up. We were on open grass, the herd strung out ahead of us, the sky big and blue and indifferent. Cole sat his horse and looked back south for a moment that stretched long enough that Wheeze Dooley, our segundo, rode up beside him. "Something wrong," we said. "That roof," Cole said. Wheeze and I exchanged a look. "The Calden Place," Cole said. "That collapsed section. She's got nothing over that part of the house before winter." "Cole," we said carefully, "we're 3 days north of her, and we've got a buyer waiting in Ogallala." "I know where we're going," Cole said. He sat quiet another moment. Then, "I'll need 2 men. Rest of you push the herd through with Wheeze. I'll meet you in Ogallala by the 15th. Wheeze looked at him the way a man looks at a person he's ridden with for 12 years and still occasionally can't predict. "You're going back to fix a stranger's roof." "She fed 7 men from a near-empty pantry," Cole said, "in the rain, without being asked and without complaint." He gathered his reins. "That's not something a man just rides away from, Wheeze." Wheeze thought about it. Then he nodded, slow. "Take Hob and Rafe. Hob can swing a hammer and Rafe doesn't know how to be useless." That's how I ended up turning south with my Uncle Cole on a Nebraska morning in late August, pointed back at a homestead we'd spent 1 wet night at, and a woman who told us to get some sleep like she was closing a door. We stopped in Harlan Flats proper first. It was a small town, a grain merchant, a dry goods, a livery, a saloon, a church without a steeple yet, a doctor's office. Cole went into the dry goods and came out with lumber he'd arranged to have delivered, roofing felt, nails, a new hinge set for the barn door I'd noticed was hanging wrong, and a 50-pound sack of flour that he had loaded into the back of a rented wagon without comment. Rafe Murdo, who was 38 and had opinions about most things, watched the flour get loaded and said, "She's going to be prickly about that." "Probably," Cole said. "You thought about what you're going to say to her." "I thought about it. And I'll say something when the time comes." He climbed up to the wagon seat. "Let's go." Vera Calden came out onto her porch when she heard the wagon, and the look on her face when she recognized Cole was not a welcoming one. "Mr. Drennan," she said, "you're going the wrong direction." "Yes, ma'am," Cole said. He climbed down from the wagon. We turned back. "I can see that." She looked at the wagon, the lumber, the roofing felt, the flour. Her expression shifted, not softened exactly, something more complicated than that. What is all this? Lumber for your roof, Cole said, and some other things. I didn't ask for lumber. No, ma'am, you didn't. I'm not a charity case, Mr. Drennan. No, ma'am, you're not, he said. You're a woman who fed 7 hungry men from a near-empty kitchen without being asked and without making us feel the cost of it. That's not charity I'm offering. That's a debt being settled. She looked at him for a long time. The prairie wind moved through the grass around the house. A chicken wandered past the fence post. You rode 3 days back, she said. Yes, ma'am. To fix a roof. And a barn door, he said. The east hinge is pulling out of the frame. Another hard wind and you'll lose it. Something crossed her face, not quite amusement, not quite exasperation, somewhere between them. She looked at me and Rafe, then back at Cole. I'll make coffee, she said, and she went inside. Rafe looked at me. I looked at him. We started unloading the wagon. We worked 3 days on the roof. Cole was not a man who did things halfway. He'd framed up roofs before, said it was something every range man ought to know how to do, and he moved through the work with the same unhurried competence he brought to everything. Rafe and I took direction and swung hammers, and between the 3 of us, the collapsed section was framed, felted, and shingled by the afternoon of the 3rd day. Vera fed us every meal. She did it without fuss and without sentiment, the way she seemed to do most things: put food on the table, poured coffee, sat down across from Cole sometimes and said very little. Cole said very little back. I started to understand that they were, in some way neither of them had named yet, talking. On the 2nd evening Vera came out to the barn, where we'd been sleeping, and stood in the doorway. There's a man named Amos Strell, she said. He runs cattle west of here. He's been trying to buy this place for 2 years. Cole was at the far end of the barn checking a bridle. He didn't look up. I know the name, he said. Heard it in town. He'll hear you're here, Vera said. He'll come by. All right. I don't need you to handle him, she said. I want to be clear about that. I've been handling Amos Strell since before Thomas died, and I'll handle him after you're gone. Cole looked up then. I understand that, he said. I won't do anything you haven't said is all right to do. She looked at him. His foreman comes by, not Strell himself. What's the foreman's name? Cleet Drum. What does Cleet Drum do when he comes by? A pause, leans on the fence, talks about the dry summers, talks about how hard it is for a woman alone, talks about what Strell's prepared to offer. Talks about how the offer won't stay open forever. Does he threaten you? Not in so many words. Does he frighten you? A longer pause this time. He makes me tired, she said finally. And something in the way she said it, not weakness, just the plain, honest weight of a woman who had been managing a thing alone for a long time, made Cole set the bridle down entirely. If he comes while we're here, Cole said, and you want me to be present for that conversation, I will be. If you want me to stay in the barn, I'll stay in the barn. It's your land and your call. I'll do what you say. Vera looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, that same single nod she'd given when we rode out in the morning after the storm. I'll let you know, she said, and she went back to the house. Rafe, who had been pretending to sleep in the hay, waited until her footsteps faded and then said, quietly, Cole. Don't, Cole said. He picked up the bridle again. Rafe smiled into the dark and didn't say anything else. Cleet Drum came on the 4th day. He was a wide man, slope-shouldered, with a way of taking up space at a fence line that was calculated to feel like enclosure. He rode up mid-morning while Cole and I were finishing the barn door hinge. Rafe had ridden into town for more nails, and he pulled up short when he saw us. He looked at the repaired roof. He looked at the new hinge set I was fitting. He looked at Cole. Don't know you, he said. No reason you would, Cole said. He kept working. You hired on here. Just helping out, Cole said. Drum looked toward the house. Vera had come out onto the porch. She stood with her arms at her sides, not the rifle this time, just herself. Mrs. Calden, Drum said, touching his hat with the elaborate courtesy of a man who has been told to be polite and resents the instruction. Mr. Strell asked me to stop by. He wanted me to let you know his offer still stands, and he's prepared to increase it by another $15 an acre if you'd like to sit down and discuss terms. I've told Mr. Strell and I've told you, Vera said, that I'm not interested in selling. Yes, ma'am, you have, Drum said. He glanced at Cole again. I see you've got some work being done. That's good. Though I imagine keeping up a place this size is a considerable burden for one person. 2, Vera said. I have 2.5 hired hands at the moment. I heard Rafe come back along the road before Drum did. When Drum turned and saw a third rider coming in from the lane, something shifted in the geometry of his posture. Not dramatic, just a small recalculation. Cole straightened from the hinge work. He was not a large man, medium height, lean, the kind of build that looks ordinary until you've seen him work or watched him go very still. He went very still now, in the particular way of a man who is giving you his full attention and letting you know it. I heard what you said about it being a burden, Cole said, and I'd respectfully suggest that's not the kind of observation that helps a business conversation. Drum looked at him. You got a stake in this property. I've got a stake in treating people decently, Cole said, which is a simpler thing. A silence. Rafe had pulled up at the gate, unhurried, watching. Drum looked at Vera, then back at Cole. Something had gone out of the air between them, not conflict exactly, more like the recognition that the shape of this particular conversation had changed, and everyone present understood it. I'll tell Mr. Strell you're still considering, Drum said to Vera. Tell him I said no, Vera said, same as last time. Drum touched his hat again. He rode out. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Rafe swung down from his horse and held up the nails. Got the right size this time, he said. Cole picked up his hammer. I handed him the hinge plate. We went back to work. That evening Vera sat on the porch after supper and Cole sat on the step below her, his back against the post, his hat beside him. I could see them from the barn door, just shapes in the last light, neither of them moving much. I went and checked on the horses and gave them their privacy. I did not hear what passed between them that evening, but when Cole came into the barn to turn in, something in the set of his shoulders was different, looser, like a thing he'd been carrying had been put down and he was deciding whether to pick it back up. He caught me looking. Get some sleep, Hob, he said. Yes, sir, I said. He lay down in the hay and looked up at the barn ceiling for a while before he slept. I'm not sure how long. I was watching the stars through the gap in the boards where the swallows nested, and I was thinking about what Wes Dooley had said when Cole turned us back south. That's not something a man just rides away from. I was 24 years old and I thought I understood what he'd meant. I didn't, not fully, but I was starting to. We should have left the next morning. The roof was done. The barn door was done. The hinge was fitted and the door swung true, and the fence along the east pasture had been restretched where it had gone slack. There was nothing left that Cole had said he'd come back to do. We didn't leave. Cole didn't announce this. He simply didn't say we were going, and in the morning he found something else that needed attention. The well housing had a cracked timber that would cause trouble in a hard freeze, and he spent the morning replacing it. Rafe and I looked at each other and found other things to fix. There was no shortage of them. Vera watched this without comment for a day. On the second day she appeared beside Cole at the well housing with a cup of coffee and stood there while he worked. You're going to run out of things to repair, she said. Maybe, Cole said. And then what? He accepted the coffee. Then I'll ride to Ogallala and collect my money from the cattle sale and figure out what's next. What's usually next for a man like you? Another trail, he said, another herd, another piece of open country. She looked out at the flat horizon, the brown grass, the sky beginning to think about September. And is that what you want? Another trail? Cole was quiet for a moment. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. I'm not sure I've asked myself that question in a good many years, he said. Maybe you should, Vera said. She took the empty cup back and went inside. Rafe appeared at my elbow. She's going to be the end of him, he said, not unkindly. The open range kind of man. Maybe, I said. Definitely, Rafe said. I've seen that look before. He had it when he met his first wife. Only difference is this woman's more direct. Cole rode to Ogallala on a Tuesday. He was gone 4 days, collected his share of the sale, paid Wheeze and the crew, squared his accounts. He came back to Harlan Flats on a Saturday. He did not go to a hotel. He went to the Calden Place. Vera opened the door before he knocked. I saw you coming up the lane, she said. Figured you would, Cole said. She stepped back to let him in. He took off his hat in the doorway. I have something to say, he said, and I'd rather say it plain if that's all right. I prefer plain, she said. He looked at her in the kitchen light, the lantern on the table, the smell of supper still in the air, the flour canister on the shelf that was no longer near empty. He'd had a sack delivered before he left for Ogallala. She hadn't said a word about it. I've been on the open range for 18 years, Cole said. I'm 41 years old. I know cattle, I know country, and I know how to read weather. I know less about staying in one place than most men my age, and I won't claim otherwise. He stopped, gathered himself. But I've thought about this place every day since we rode out of it in August, and I've thought about you every day since the night you fed 7 men from an empty pantry without making any of us feel the cost of it. And I don't want another trail, Vera. I want to know if there's anything here worth staying for. If there's not, I'll say my goodbye and mean it, and I won't trouble you again. But I needed to ask. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the September wind moved through the dry grass. Vera looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, the well housing you replaced, the timber you used on the east side is a little green. It'll want checking in the spring. Cole looked at her. I'm saying, Vera said, that there's work here that goes past what you've already done, and I could use a man who knows how to do it. A pause. The ghost of something moved across her face, not quite a smile but close enough to its cousin to be recognizable. And other things. Cole stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he came inside and put his hat on the peg by the door, the peg Thomas Calden had put there, the one that had been empty for 14 months, and he did it the way a man hangs a hat who intends to find it there in the morning. I'll need to send word to Wheeze, he said. There's paper in the desk, Vera said. She went to the stove. I know this because Cole told me later. Told me the whole of that kitchen conversation the night before he and Vera married in the Harlan Flats church the following April. In the simple ceremony they'd arranged without much fuss, with me standing up for Cole and the doctor's wife standing up for Vera, and the steeple still not finished on the church and nobody caring. He told it the way he told most things, plain, without ornament, like a man reading a stretch of country. But there was something different in his voice when he got to the part about the hat on the peg. Something that had been wound tight in Cole Drennan for 7 years since Kansas and a woman's grave and a door he'd closed behind him. I could hear it coming loose in that story, the way a knot comes loose slow when the tension finally goes out of the rope. Rafe Murdo stayed through October, helping Cole break sod on the North 40 that Vera had been wanting to turn for 2 years. He left in November with a handshake and an invitation to come back in the spring, which he did, and the spring after that. And eventually he took work in Harlan Flats at the livery, and was around so much that he became simply part of the landscape of the Calden Place, the way a particular tree or fence post becomes part of the landscape of a farm. Just there, necessary, no longer remarkable. Dooley came through the following summer with a herd and stayed 3 days, and sat on the porch with Cole in the evenings and said almost nothing, which was his way of expressing deep satisfaction with how things had turned out. He shook Cole's hand when he left, and he shook Vera's hand too, which from Weeze was practically a speech. Amos Strell sent Cleet Drum by once more in November, 6 weeks after Cole had settled in. Drum rode up, saw the repaired barn, the new south fence line, the smoke from the chimney, Cole's horses in the paddock, and Cole himself coming around the corner of the barn with a post-hole digger. Drum sat his horse at the gate for a moment. Cole looked at him. Drum touched his hat and rode back the way he came. That was the last time anyone from the Strell operation came to the Calden Place. Strell sold his operation 4 years later and moved to Colorado. Nobody in Harlan Flats was especially sorry. The spring after the wedding I came back to help with the planting, the way I'd said I would, and I spent 6 weeks on the place and watched something I want to try to describe right, because I think it's the part that mattered most. Cole Drennan, in all the years I'd ridden with him, had been a man who existed in motion. He wasn't restless, that's not the right word. Restless is anxious, always looking for the next thing. Cole wasn't anxious. He was just oriented outward, toward the next piece of country, the next drive, the next horizon. That was where he lived. The open range was not a way of working for Cole. It was a way of being. On the Calden Place, the Drennan place now, though Vera kept both names on the deed and nobody disputed it, he was still not idle. Cole was never idle, but still in himself. I'd watch him come in from the field at the end of the day and wash his hands at the pump and go inside, and there was a quality to the way he crossed that threshold, the hat on the peg, Vera at the stove, the lantern lit, that I can only describe as a man arriving somewhere, not stopping, arriving. As if that kitchen, that peg, that woman and that lamp were the thing he'd been heading toward on every trail he'd ever ridden, and he'd been riding in the right direction all along without knowing the destination. Vera was the same woman she'd been when she opened the door with a rifle and looked at 7 wet strangers in the last light. She didn't soften in any way that diminished her. She was still direct and self-contained, and had a low tolerance for anything she considered unnecessary. But with Cole there was a quality of ease to her that I recognized as trust, not blind trust, not the easy kind, but the earned kind, the kind that comes from watching a man do what he says and say what he means over the long months of a Nebraska winter when there's no performance possible and the truth of a person comes out plain. They didn't talk much as a rule, but they moved around each other in the kitchen and the yard with the quiet efficiency of 2 people who have learned each other's rhythms and found them compatible. Cole knew how she took her coffee. Vera knew which silences of Cole's meant he was thinking and which meant something was wrong. They'd found a language that didn't need many words, and they used it well. That is what 18 years on the open range had been preparing Cole Drennan for without his knowing it. Not another trail, not another herd. This kitchen, this woman, this land. The flower story became something of a legend in Harlan Flats over the years, the way small stories do in small places. People knew the broad shape of it. A cattle drover had sheltered at the widow Calden's place in a storm. She'd fed his whole crew from nothing, and he'd come back to fix her roof and never left. The specifics varied depending on who was telling it. In some versions the crew was 12 men, not 7. In some versions the roof had been half-collapsed for years rather than freshly storm-damaged. In most versions there was some kind of confrontation with Amos Strell that involved more drama than the reality, which was simply Cleet Drum looking at Cole and deciding the geometry wasn't in his favor. The true version is the one I've told here, because I was present for most of it and Cole told me the rest. The part people always got right, in every version, was the flour. That near-empty canister. The way Vera had fed 7 hungry strangers from the last of her stores and waved off the cost of it, because that was simply what a person did when other people were cold and hungry, and there was anything left in the pantry to give. Cole used to say, not often, he wasn't a man for aphorisms, that most of what he knew about the kind of man he wanted to be, he'd learned in the first 10 minutes of sitting at Vera Calden's table. I think what he meant was that she'd shown him something unperformed. Not charity made to look good, not generosity aimed at being seen, but the simple instinct of a woman who understood that what you have is meant to be shared with people who need it, and that the accounting comes later or not at all. It came back to her. That's how the story ends, and it's a satisfying ending, the kind where what goes around comes around and the arithmetic of decency works out in the end. But I don't think that's what Cole was saying, exactly. I think he was saying that a woman who does what Vera did from an empty pantry in a rainstorm, for 7 strangers she'll never see again as far as she knows. That woman has a quality of heart that doesn't come along often, and when you find it, you don't just ride away from it. You turn south. Cole Drennan is buried on the North 40, the piece of ground he and Rafe broke together in that first October, the piece that became the best wheat field on the Calden Place. It was his request, and Vera honored it without discussion. She's buried beside him now, gone 2 winters after he was, and the marker they share is a plain one, the kind neither of them would have wanted fussed over. I go back to Harlan Flats when I can. The place is run by a young couple now, good people, careful with the land. The barn door Cole rehung still swings true, which is the kind of legacy a man like Cole would have appreciated above most others. The hat peg is still there by the kitchen door. The new owners don't know whose it was or what it meant when it stopped being empty, but I know. Some debts get settled in lumber and nails, and a new roof before winter. Some get settled in a hat on a peg and a lantern lit, and a man who stopped asking himself what was next because he'd finally figured out that this was it. That was enough for Cole Drennan. Given what I knew of him across 11 years of open country, I'd say it was more than enough. It was everything.